Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stian Westlake. I am Executive Chair of the Economic and Social Research Council, and I'm going to be your chair for the next session. We're talking about the really super relevant question of how do we create the right environment for innovation? And it feels really germane to this question, given that we are kind of gradually now recognizing this concept of the new square mile, the new Palo Alto. I find it fascinating. I find myself around here an awful lot, and there's something very historic when you wander around here. You see these kind of the remnants of when this place was first a kind of great industrial hub. You see the amazing, beautiful St Pancras station. You see the coal drops yard where they literally used to drop the coal to power London. You see the gas holders, which are now luxury flats, but again, were a kind of a prime industrial infrastructure for London as a thriving city. And I think it's kind of fascinating now to see how this space is, in a different way, the beating heart of the economy. But rather than focusing on the kind of tangible capital, the gas holders, the coal yards, the trains, just as important is what I would call the intangible capital, the stuff that you can't touch or feel. The ideas, so the research and development that goes on in the Crick Centre across the road. The creative output of the University of Arts London and some of our designers who are around here. The animating social and financial capital that you see in places like this really exciting hub here at Phoenix Court. It feels like a sign, a representation of how the economy is changing. And one of the interesting things, I think, is we probably need different types of networks, of connections, of institutions to make that work. I remember goodness me, over 20 years ago, I used to live and work in the original Palo Alto, old Palo Alto, if you like. And many of you will know Palo Alto and Silicon Valley well. It's obviously an incredibly dynamic and incredibly creative place. I still miss the buzz. But in many ways, it's quite a boring place to live, dare I say it. There's not a lot to do. You can kind of go to a few coffee shops, you can go to the mall, you can go to Whole Foods. It's not, in many ways, a buzzing place from the point of creativity and so forth. And so I think there is a real opportunity when I look here at what we have around us in the new square mile, the new Palo Alto, to create something that is not just as good as the old Palo Alto, but even better. And I think the stats that we heard this morning, some of the input we've had about finance, about entrepreneurship here, they certainly give me hope for how that can be the case. So, with that in mind, we are incredibly lucky to have a panel of experts that one can only dream of to address this question. We have, and we're going to go in order for some introductions, and then we're going to, for some introductory comments, and then we're going to hear more. We have Diane Coyle, who's Professor of Public Policy at Cambridge University. Diane was talking about intangible capital before anyone else was. She knows about measuring the economy and is going to tell us some interesting details about how we might apply that in a new Palo Alto context. We have James Purnell, who's Vice Chancellor of the University of Arts London, so a key organization, a key institution here, and someone who is exactly on that boundary of creativity, innovation, technology. We have Georgia Gould, who is, in a sense, the leader of the whole place, the leader of Camden Council, and who has worked deeply over the years around that intersection between the kind of economic vibrancy and the cultural life, the local life of Camden and the area that we're in. And then finally, we have Laura Citron, who runs London and Partners, the trade and investment agency for the city, who more than anyone can make the case for London, make the case for London's vital assets, and in particular, the vital asset we're in at the moment, the new square mile. We're going to try and get a bit of time for audience Q&A as well, so think about some really, really good questions to quiz our excellent panel on. But first of all, I'm going to ask a few questions to our panel members directly. And I'd like to start with Diane. You've thought so much about this, how we structure, how we think about these innovation systems. How should we be thinking about how the new square mile and new Palo Alto works and can work?
So thanks, Diane. Thanks, everybody. Really great to be here. Can you hear at the back? Because I know the acoustics aren't wonderful. So I'm an academic and an economist. I feel I always ought to get the apology out of the way to start with. But I thought what I'd talk about is some of the evidence we have on why these different kinds of intangible assets really matter for innovation. Because innovation is really about ideas, and ideas come attached to people. And so it's how people behave, how they interact, that drives the broader system effects of a successful innovation system. And there's a lot of evidence that it's actually face-to-face contact that's really important. We've all been through the experience of learning how to use Zoom, and in many ways it's fantastic. But for the serendipity, bringing together people who don't know each other, bringing together ideas that have never met each other before and don't sit within the framework of a scheduled online meeting, face-to-face is still really important. There's a live debate among economists now about this because of the switch to hybrid working and how much it matters. But nobody's saying you can substitute entirely for those face-to-face contacts. And the term for it in the literature is social capital, and there are different kinds. So there's something called weak social capital, which is somebody you might meet in a shop every week, or somebody you might meet through a class that you're taking. But they're contrasted with strong social capital, which is your family and friends, people you rely on when you're in trouble. Now, strong social capital sounds like it's good and it's important for everybody, but weak social capital is really important too, because it's all about those serendipitous kinds of contacts. And it's very hard to measure. And it's very hard to measure because it's always really idiosyncratic. But all of the work that's looked at the importance of social capital in innovation, in entrepreneurship, in economic growth, points to it being an incredibly important asset that the economy has to have. Now, I always think about these assets as a portfolio. We need the physical capital. We need the broadband networks. We need the buildings, the places where people meet. We need what economists in their poetic way call human capital, which is our own skills and enterprise and know-how. We need physical capital, spaces. We need finance, but also importantly, that social capital. And I would divide that now into two bits. So one is the person-to-person bit. Who do you know? And not necessarily in that bad old boys network way, but the contacts for the information, the know-how, that's really important. But then also a kind of overlap between places and people, which is the places where people meet. And it's now increasingly called social infrastructure. There's a very nice book about libraries that points to them as an important piece of social infrastructure, where people from different kinds of backgrounds go and can meet and can talk. And again, social infrastructure, which can be public spaces, it can be supermarkets, it can be post offices, again, looks like it's being a really important intangible asset. So what are the takeaways from that? One is that funding physical and intellectual infrastructure is important, and the government does that. It's invested a whole bunch in the knowledge capital and the buildings down the road here. Personal connections and trust really matter, and that's both inside organizations to make them effective, but also outside your organization and among people. But also, and something that's very hard to address is that a lot of the barriers to people making connections can be self-imposed, or they seem invisible. It's quite hard to understand why you don't get over them. And there are some nice accounts of the old Palo Alto. At key moments, it's a very boring place, but at key moments, a particular coffee shop or a particular bar became the place where people who were interested in computers, in this case, went and knew that on Thursday evenings there'd be other people there they could have a chat with. So I think that's maybe the thought that I'll end on before I pass on, that this social infrastructure thought, it's where the people, the human capital, the social capital, and the physical capital all come together.
Thank you, Diane. That's fascinating, and that comparison of the old and new Palo Alto really rings true. With that in mind, this question of networks, people being all important as a source of infrastructure, can I turn to Laura? You see what our competitor places do, you know what we have to offer. How do you feel? What do you feel we should be focusing on from that point of view?
Thank you. Great to be here. Can you hear me at the back? Yes, thank you. Diane, I would love you to speak before me on every panel I do. As that really was the perfect framing. But when we think about these intangibles, they exist within companies. So we know, you've written very eloquently, Stian, about how companies invest in their brands and so on, but they are also public goods. And the most important intangible assets that are public goods for innovation are human networks and brand. And those human networks or social infrastructure, whatever we want to call them, are the way that the ideas and the money and the people flow around. And we know that geographic proximity alone doesn't create a cluster. And we are sitting here in the heart of Summertown. We are surrounded by poverty, and we are surrounded by some of the most innovative and wealthy companies in the world. So this in itself shows us that clusters are not just about geographic proximity. And I don't know how many of you work in a building with multiple occupants. How many of you have formed a meaningful relationship with somebody who works in a different floor of your multi-story building just because you happen to be in the same building? Without the human networks, geographic proximity is meaningless. So the good news is that creating these human networks is actually not that difficult to do, and it's also not very expensive. Let me give you a concrete example. We run an accelerator program for scale-ups for high-growth businesses in London. We've been doing it for years. We've just had one of these big, awful evaluation things that you have to do when you spend lots of grant-funded money. Anyway, it shows that the return on investment on that program is almost 100 to 1. So for every pound of taxpayers' money you put in, you get nearly £100 back. What do? We don't give them any grants. We don't invest any equity. We don't give them loans. We don't give them free workspace. They're lucky if they even get a biscuit off us, frankly. But what we do is we connect them to customers, to investors, to their peers to learn from each other, from experts. And that is what grows the businesses. And it takes a few million quid a year to do that for 300 London scale-ups. For probably under 10-ish million, you could do it for the whole of the UK. But we don't think enough in policy terms about human networks as infrastructure. These kinds of programs are paid for on a very ad hoc, short-term P&L funding basis, whereas in fact, they are fundamental critical infrastructure for innovation in the same way that Wi-Fi net, that broadband is, and that public transport is, and that skills and education are. But we're not investing in them in that way. And just a couple of very quick local examples as we're talking about New Palo Alto today. We know, and you talked about weak, this idea of weak social capital, weak ties, that the most exciting things often happen when we connect the people from different social networks. So yes, it's about tech bros meeting in a pub, but what happened just down the road here was that we had some of the best AI people in the world and some of the best genetic scientists in the world, and they created AlphaFold. That's amazing, and that's that crossover. And at a much more parochial level, Phoenix Court, Local Globe, who are here, have chosen to base themselves in the heart of Somerstown, but not just to be physically located here, and I can see Saul there, but to create networks and connections with the community. And I can tell you firsthand that has been transformational for the young people who live in the 100 meters around this building. But it's not just because Saul chose to put an office here. It's because they then made the effort to make the connections with the community. So this is things that Palo Alto can't do. If you have a monoculture of tech all on strip malls down great motorways, you don't have that richness and that serendipity of meetings of different kinds of people. And that's what we can uniquely do in London. And we must do it to continue to innovate, but also for our innovation to be inclusive, which I'm sure, Georgia, you all talk about a lot, because it's about who gains from the innovation depends on who's in the network and who's out of the network.
Thank you, Laura. And what you say, where you finished off there on inclusive innovation, feels so important given that as Camden, we're in a borough that has both these kind of amazing institutions and some examples of great wealth, but also places of great deprivation, and is a kind of place of just massive diversity in all kinds of respects. So with that in mind, can I turn to you, Georgia, and ask how should we be thinking about innovation in an inclusive way?
Yeah, well, delighted to welcome you all to the heart of Camden, and we are important innovation districts, probably globally now, and I'm sure we've been through some of the statistics, but I think we've got over 2,000 high growth scale-ups happening just around here. We're seeing huge investment in biomedical science, AstraZeneca. We can see Francis Crick, in technology with Google and DeepMind, but also the arts and culture, and we're a real hub for creative industries and leading arts organisations, including James's. And I think what's really exciting about the mix we see here is that it's not just dominated by one sector, but it's the fusion of lots of different skills and perspectives that have come together to create something that feels very unique. And I think that what has made this area special is, firstly, it's transport links, and we have amazing transport links within London, but also to other parts of the country, Manchester, Leeds, and so this hub connects people into the UK economy in general. We can maybe talk later about the opportunities around Euston and HS2 and some of the deep challenges, but also we're networked into Europe through St Pancras. So we have huge transport links. We have this mix of different sectors coming together. But I think crucially, this is not a kind of innovation park with loads of buildings in the middle of nowhere. This is a collection of institutions that sit in the heart of London, in the heart of communities, and is incredibly porous. And that feels very special. I think it's why it's become such an attractive place for people to invest. And I often get told by global companies that this area is one of the most attractive places for people to come and work, because people enjoy feeling part of a diverse community, feeling part of a city, and feeling connected. But that also comes with, I think, both huge challenges, but also responsibilities. And you both talked about the place we're in here being connected to some of the poorest communities, not just in Britain, but in Europe. And all of the challenges that come with cities, with where we are at the moment, exist in this area. So we see deep health inequalities. Somerstown, just over here, people living here have a 10-year lower life expectancy than people literally 20 minutes up the road in Hampstead, and are likely to live 20 years in poorer health. We have huge issues of unemployment. We see people facing the kind of front line of a climate crisis in overcrowded homes where they can't afford to put in air conditioning or to be able to deal with all of the challenges that come with the energy crisis. So all of these big global challenges we face exist in this place. So I think the question for us is, what is this innovation for? Is it just innovation for innovation's sake, or is it starting to come together to solve some of the huge challenges we face as a society? And I think that one way to do that is to start with the challenges on our doorstep. So having these world-leading biomedical science companies, some of the first investment outside of American research, actually starting to change some of the health inequalities in Camden, but then what that means for innovation more broadly. And I think that so the ambition we've set ourselves is twofold. One is to make sure this is a genuine ecosystem where you are seeing the coming together of sectors in the way that you said, but also that meeting of communities, and that those three things come together. And I think what we need to enable that to happen is absolutely spaces. And we've absolutely seen the critical nature of that social infrastructure, and Saul and others opening up spaces like this to allow deep collaboration between communities, companies, and universities and other institutions. I think we need to pull on the diversity of our community to make sure that people have jobs in these organisations, to ensure that we're not just seeing innovation through a single lens, but we're really embracing the creativity that comes with a really diverse community. And then making sure some of the investment that's happening is investing in the idea and energy of our communities. And I could give a whole talk about the kind of radical history of some of the communities around here have been in the forefront of so social movements around race inequality, housing, feminism. And so there's massive innovation and energy in our community that we want to back, and we're working with Local Globe on a community wealth fund to try and bring some of that resource directly into communities. And the final thing I'd say is that we've been increasingly working with UCL around how missions and bold missions can create a joint vision that kind of brings on the collective imagination of those companies and institutions that are in our borough, but working alongside our communities.
Thank you. Well, that's fascinating. And I think that kind of the question of how we can do a better job than the old Palo Alto did of making our innovation inclusive and bringing people together, that's a really inspiring
The new Palo
vision.
Alto thing always makes me nervous because what we don't want is to see our communities driven out in the way that has happened there. So we need to learn from what's happened and do something really different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And with that in mind, that question of inclusive innovation, how we make that real, perhaps we can turn to the leader of another really important local institution, University of Arts London, are you that way? You're very close, just that way, almost in the old Coal Drops yard that we were talking about, I guess, so part of the industrial heritage as well. James, tell us about the role of the arts, creativity in all of this vision.
Great, so it's wonderful to be here. Hope people can hear me at the back. Yes, lovely. Speaking last, I'm slightly reminded there was a US senator at the end of a conference once who said that everything had been said, but not everybody had said it. So I'll try and avoid that particular problem. I used to be a minister for the creative industries, and every now and then had to do a policy document on what can we do to support the creative industries. And actually, it was quite hard because that sector is so diverse that finding sort of cross-cutting things was a bit of a challenge. But actually, the thing that you always came back to was art and design schools. So why are the creative industries in London successful? Why is the UK so creative? A lot of it comes, not a lot of it, but a key part of it is our art and design schools. In London, we have the two best. We have the RCA and ourselves. And if you go and look to the creativity of all the things that we were talking about this morning, there is nearly always a designer or a creative thinker at the heart of it. So when we were talking about robots earlier, one of the things that was listed as vital was industrial design. Obviously, Thomas Heatherwick went to the RCA, Manchester School of Art. Terence Conran came to UAL, Stella McCartney, Grace Bondo-Wood, David Adjaye. The list of people who are shaping the creativity of the UK is extremely long and unfortunately quite often forgotten. I've just come back from China, and we feel like we don't feel like that significant a place when you're looking at it from Beijing, Shanghai, or Hong Kong. But actually, one of the things that people do come back to is the amazing universities that we have and the amazing record of creativity. Now, unfortunately, we have this centuries-old madness in this country, which is we insist on having a choice between creativity and science, creativity and engineering. And it absolutely insults all of the engineers, scientists, and technologists who are like, oh, you're here, Thomas, I didn't see you, who feel, well, we're creative as well, and of course they are, and it insults all the creatives who feel like we're important as well. So if we could sort of slightly move beyond that to all of those subjects are important and creative, and actually it is at the cross-cutting boundary of all of those, often bringing people together who don't work together normally or know each other normally, that a lot of the most exciting innovation comes. Give you an example of that. We have a course just around the corner at CSM called Material Futures, where you don't have to have a creative background. People come from all sorts of backgrounds and are trained in design methodology. And we have amazing innovations coming out of that, most of which you wouldn't easily classify as from the creative industries. So one example would be a graduate last year, MA graduate, who, the fatberg. So the fatberg comes largely from people pouring used cooking oil down the drain. I'm sure no one has done that in this room. Actually, this graduate has discovered a bacteria that will eat through your used cooking oil overnight so that you can pour it down the drain. Is that creative tech? Is it creative? Is it hard tech? I don't know what it is, but it's certainly very, very exciting. So I think I agree, the Palo Alto analogy, I can see why you've developed it, and it's a sort of enticing concept, but it's also a slightly dangerous concept, I think. Partly because defining ourselves against someone else feels a bit potentially less confident than just being confident in ourselves. But actually, one very interesting analogy or insight from that analogy is we have got amazing art schools and design schools. I don't know if Pasadena counts as being in Palo Alto, but if you don't include Pasadena, they don't have any of the top 20 art and design schools in the world. We do. We have Johnny Ive, who's chair of the RCA, who obviously has been fairly important to the development of Apple, also went to the RCA. And so I think maybe as a finishing thought, harnessing that and getting away from the forced choice and thinking of the importance of creativity across all of those subjects and creating the human capital, the government policy, the local policy to make the best of the crosscut rather than creating forced choices may be an advantage that we could build on.
Really helpful. So we've had a vision here of networks, cultural capital, these weak ties, the importance of inclusion and missions in trying to drive that, and then the centrality of creativity and kind of being a bit interdisciplinary and mixing things up to all of that, which feels very appropriate to this place. But I'm particularly keen to get some questions from our fantastic audience. I think everyone would like to answer them. Can I take a couple? And when I go to you, if you can say who you are in case people don't know. Gentleman in the front row, please, first of all. Someone might bring you a microphone, but if not, I can say your question out loud.
Yeah, my name's Thomas Heatherwick. I was on the first panel and had the chance to do coal drops and the Google building there. And what I'm really interested in is the best experience I had in Palo Alto was walking along the old high street, and one of the shops had outside it a robot with a live face on it, and it started talking to me, and then I followed it, and it went into the shop, and it had 7 other ones that were just there, and there were no people there. And it was an experiment with this was 10 years ago with the founders who had used that. And I'm really interested in everyone talking about the social networks and the intangible infrastructure, because the thing that's really hit us is how the high street is dying because of digital amazingness, and the construct of a lively town or city was all based around shopping. And once you rip that out, we're left with a business rates that's very high, and we've got all these amazing people. But for example, the school Elizabeth Garrett Anderson that Michelle Obama comes to about once a year around the corner from here, the girls there, most from Somerstown and all just around here. How do they know? Because they're not even in the building ready to meet the person on the 4th floor. How can we bring the high street alive more? Because that's the place where we learned that online you don't actually, it was supposed to be the amazing equalizer where you see everything, and we discovered you don't. The algorithms spin you off to the wrong places and grab you. But physically being there on the street, how could we unlock that? And how important do you think that could be for the person who would otherwise never know that they could contribute, and that chemistry?
That's really interesting. So how do we create these physical spaces? Who would like to? Georgia, would you like to?
Yeah, something Thomas and I have been speaking about, because I think that the real risk is when our community say they feel like an island of poverty in between glass, that these places are not for them, and so I think you need to create opportunities for the community to come in and kind of directly take over some of these spaces. Just down the road, we have a Somerstown People's History Museum that tells the history of Somerstown, and O'Souls really supported that. Having that on the other side would be and those kind of places, which are a real signal to the community that this is for you. Because at the moment, a lot of the experience is that there are thriving markets over that the community use, and then there are more kind of shops that the community don't find hugely affordable. And young people talk about when they go into like the kind of heart of King's Cross, they feel very safe, but they don't necessarily feel welcome. And so I think there's one thing about bringing the community into those spaces, and another for the institutions to open up, what they, their knowledge, their tools. So, I mean, our young people absolutely love YouTube. They love using all of those tools. If there was a kind of open place that they could come and, we have community studios in other parts of Camden that they could come and use, the demand would be off the scale. The problem is they don't have any money to spend, many of our young people, in the height of a cost of living crisis. So I think there has to be investment into kind of free spaces that entice people in, and then also pulling some of that resource into our estate. So we're going out to people, not just always expecting them to come in. Laura?
I completely agree with you that we really need to think about how we get people into physical spaces. And I sit on lots of panels where I get asked, what's the big competition for London? Who are you worried about? Is it New York? Is it Singapore? Is it Dubai? Is it Shenzhen? And increasingly, I think the competition for big cities globally is not each other. It's the internet and slippers. It's people staying at home. Why would I come here on holidays if I can sit at home and have an amazing immersive experience? Why would I go to a conference or a work event if I could just dial in? Why would I go to a restaurant if I can get really good quality food on Deliveroo and watch amazing telly on Netflix? So the challenge that we all have, we have as city leaders, is how do we create something that's special and that can't be recreated in a virtual world? And that has to be experiences and human connection. The feeling of walking down a street, walking into a shop, having a chat, you can't recreate that. And the serendipity of who you can bump into and the quality of relationship you can create, you can't recreate that. And we have to understand as cities that that's our competitive advantage, and that we're not fighting each other. We're fighting people being on a beach house and just plugged in the internet and never taking their shorts off ever. Just one small point on retail, though. There's quite a strong narrative at the moment that retail is in severe decline, and that the city centre retail in particular is. And I just want to say that I really don't think that's true, or the facts don't back that up. If you look at the West End, there are very, very few vacancies now. The West End is really bounced back and is booming. There are specific issues about Oxford Street, which we often think of as the barometer in the nation's high street. It's a very bad barometer, because Oxford Street is a very specific retail ecosystem that's got its own issues going on, and we shouldn't necessarily look at that and equate that to all the retail. But we're not talking about city centre retail so much here as local community retail, I think.
So I want to add that it's not just retail, because a lot of the things that bring people to high streets to shop are bits of public services or other kinds of community assets that have closed down outside London, I'm talking about particularly. So, the coffee shop, but also the library or the local art gallery, and all those kinds of places that gave people a reason to go and where anybody would feel comfortable going in. They're the ones that have contracted their footprint in all kinds of places around this country, and that's made the retail shrink as well.
I've got one. I didn't see who was first. Why don't we go over there first? And then we'll take both, and then we can.
Hi, this thing doesn't work. Hello, hi, hello, Mike Butcher. Gee, okay, let's get a new sound man next time. Mike Butcher from TechCrunch. I think, to be honest with you, I think we're conflating the conversation here. Palo Alto is not Somerstown, is not Camden. And as diverse as we love the diversity in London, London did not produce AI, did not produce generative AI. It produced DeepMind, yes, but it didn't produce open AI. And the revolution that's going on right now, is not coming out of Somerstown. So we need to have a real conversation about, the fact is, in a brunch queue in San Francisco, someone in front of you will be talking about cloud computing, and someone behind you will be talking about generative AI. That doesn't happen in London, and they're totally different ecosystems. One is completely focused on tech, and unabashedly so, unapologetically, it is a boring place to live because everybody's talking about tech, nothing else. It's horrible, but that's why they do it, and that's what they produce. So can we just not conflate the two? London is going to different a better. We just had the mayor of London, by the way, launch London Tech Week, talking about culture and stuff like that. It's great, but it's not producing generative AI. So can we just not conflate the two, please? And by the way, can I quickly ask Diane, how's Sophie from Romania?
Let's just take this one question at the lady on the left-hand side of the aisle, because I think we're getting pretty close to our time cut-off.
I completely agree with you, but I would also say that in San Francisco, they've neglected their local community. So basically, they have horrible social problems because of exactly the points that these people are making. They're not connecting with their local communities. And so all the top tech people that I've heard of are leaving to go to Austin, Texas and other places because they've neglected exactly. So these people are actually right. You're right too, but I think they've got something.
Let's quickly get this last question in and then we'll come back to the panel.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm interested, you're talking, as we walk around here, we look at the community. I don't see a butcher and I don't see a baker and I don't see a candlestick maker. And that's what I want to see, in a world where you want people to get off the sofa and stop booking things online. They want to walk in and see bread being made and, dairy being made. And I think that that's something that I already see elsewhere in the country, but I don't see any of it around here in Somerstown or in St. Pancras. And I just don't understand. I'd like to understand, why are there not more sort of atelier-based, food-based, owner-type organizations here? Is it just because it's too expensive? Is that what it is?
So a couple of questions there. Are we really ever going to be the same type of place as Palo Alto? Kind of Mike's question. Are we kidding ourselves about the tech side of things? Do we need more physical things? Do we need to improve the quality of life? Any sort of quick thoughts from the panel on any of those questions?
I mean, I don't think, no, we won't be, but then I wouldn't want to be, because I think that I think some of the massive challenges that you've talked are not just the homelessness and the social challenges, but is there truly enough diversity and mission going into the innovation that's happening there? And so we are seeing world-leading innovation here around biomedical sciences and cures to cancer and so on that are using AI. And so there's something about the confluence of all the different sectors, as we've said, that creates something really unique and special in this place. And to your question, I mean, there are. There's a regular market and so much, and that kind of high street does exist in Somerstown, but and then there's King's Cross will have like artisan bread day, but like our community will not be able to afford what's going on there. So I think the question is, how do and it's a slightly different question than the one we've been discussing, but the housing crisis is driving so many people away, and how do we keep our diversity and that mix and serve both communities together, because otherwise we'll lose what makes this special.
So I think that tension, that idea of making sure that we raise our aspirations at the same time that we preserve what is really important about this very special place, that feels like a really important lesson for us to end on. We're just running out of time. We've got less than 30 seconds left. So all I'd like to say now, thank you for being a fantastic audience. Thank you all for being a brilliant panel and bringing insights from so many domains. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you very much.